In our next reconstruction, we're taking you back exactly 7 weeks to Preston in Lancashire. It's an especially sad story because the victim was a 9-year-old boy, Imraan Vohra. We start in Avenham in Preston on Thursday the 11th of July. At Frenchwood Junior School, it's the last lesson of the day.
It's not just cut in half the E shape, but we get a mirror image. If we put a mirror there, as we've tried before, we get the full E. So what I want you to do with your worksheets is take the first worksheet with the capital letter shapes on. And
Imraan was a cheerful boy. His teachers found him reliable, and he was popular with classmates, though reserved and rather quiet.
that you can find in those capital letters.
He loved sports. Just the previous afternoon, he'd won several prizes at the school's sports day.
Is that the only line symmetry? Is it? You've kept it. OK, children, there's the bell. We need to pack away quickly today, so can you just slip everything into your drawer, please? Take care going home, and we'll see you tomorrow.
School finished at 3:15. But this Thursday, Imraan and some of his friends stayed in the playground to play marbles for a while. The game over, Imraan would normally walk home with his friends.
Are you not coming home today? Nah, I'm ready for here for someone. I'll see you tomorrow.
He didn't say who he was waiting for. From this point on, precisely what happened is unclear. When one of Imraan's classmates left the school, Imraan was still standing at the gate. She thinks she saw a young Asian man across the road.
Imraan!
And she says he called out to Imraan. She's fairly sure he crossed over to the man and that they walked off together. Less certain is a sighting just after 4 o'clock in Avenham Lane. A witness saw a small boy crying. He thinks the boy was wearing a beige and brown anorak with a red stripe, similar to Imraan's. The boy disappeared down Shepherd Street. Another possibility, about 4:15, a motorist saw a boy a little further down Avenham Lane. He was in the company of a scruffy-looking man, maybe in his 40s. They were heading in the direction of Avenham Park. It's a popular area with open spaces and woodland used by many people as a shortcut. At about 4:30, this woman clearly recalls seeing a small boy in a beige and brown anorak. The boy was on his own, and when she glanced back, he was gone. Any of these sightings could have been of Imraan, for he often came to Avenham Park to play. He had a series of dens all over the park, and he'd spend many afternoons here, sometimes with friends, often alone. What's known for certain is that on Thursday afternoon, Imraan failed to turn up for lessons at the local mosque. He was due there with all the other Muslim children in the area at 5 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, when he still hadn't come home, his parents were so worried that they decided to call in the police. Neighbours were alerted, and on Friday morning, the police launched a major inquiry. They appealed for information in English and in Urdu.
9 साला इमरान वोहरा कल दोपहर कोई 3:30 बजे आखिरी बार एवनहम पार्क के नज़दीक फ्रेंचवुड जूनियर स्कूल के बाहर देखा गया था. इसके बाद आपने अगर उसे देखा हो या इसके बारे में कोई खबर मिली हो तो मेहरबानी करके मुकामी पुलिस से राब्ता कायम करें. इमरान भूरे.
They began a thorough search of the whole district. It went on late into Friday night and was resumed at 5 a.m., first light on Saturday. Many of the family's friends and neighbours joined in to help. 40 minutes later, at a place known locally as the tipping area, here near the old tram bridge, they found Imraan.
Come here, quick! Come over here!
He was lying in one of his dens. He'd been sexually assaulted and strangled. Superintendent John Boyd, this is a ghastly crime.
Yes, it is. It's a horrible sexual crime. Imran was a victim of a horrible sexual assault, He probably, when the assault was being committed, he probably had a ligature around his neck. This ligature subsequently strangled him.
Now, there must have been people who saw Imraan that day and who saw whoever was the killer, though they may not have realised anything significant in what they saw. Let's just remind ourselves that we've got a map which shows where the body was found. Yeah. And there it is by the old
tram bridge
in Avenham Park.
Yes.
Now, the school is where in relation?
The school is on the right.
Frenchwood Junior School.
About 400 or 500 yards away.
OK. Now, it was there at Frenchwood School, of course, that one of Imraan's friends saw him with an older man. She's pretty sure of that, isn't she?
Yes, she is a schoolmate of Imraan's, and she knew Imraan. She saw Imraan standing at the school gate, and she saw a man across the road who was described as being about 5'10" or 6 foot, in his late 20s, slim, black hair. She just said he was an Asian man, and she knows the Asian community.
Now, obviously, we badly need to find anyone who knew Imraan in relation to an older man.
Yes, that's correct. If it is true that this man picked Imraan up from school, then Imraan must have known him beforehand, and we would like to know of the association.
Now, what about people in the park? There must have been lots of people, potential witnesses there.
There's a lot of people in the park who originally were unidentified. A number of them now have been identified. We urgently need these people to come forward. They might think they can't help us, but we need to eliminate them because we have their descriptions, and probably we have the description of the killer.
Now, I gather that the park is sometimes used by gays, by homosexuals. They may be reluctant to call in.
Yes, a number of them frequent the public conveniences in the park. It's their focal point. We have interviewed a large number of them, but in fairness to them, they are cooperating and they are giving us information.
There was a boy seen running from the park. I know that you really want to trace him badly, to eliminate him.
About 4:15, a boy was seen running along South Meadow Lane away from the park. He's about 15, fairish ginger hair, a cream-coloured shirt and a grey sweater and green slacks. The thing about him was that he looked frightened, and he was running faster than he would normally do on a jogging run.
And I know that a week before the murder, a man was seen with a younger Asian boy.
On the Thursday before the murder, about 400 yards away from the murder scene, a man who is described as being 35 to 40 years was seen in Miller Park, which adjoins Avenham Park, at 4:30. He was seen in some bushes with a 10-year-old boy who was an Asian boy. There is no evidence that this was Imraan, and it probably wasn't Imraan.
OK, so you need to find him and indeed anyone else to eliminate themselves, but also just in case they saw something which will fit in with something else
we
that you
need
know.
These people to come forward to assist the inquiries.
All right, and kids, of course, if you can help in any way, I don't know, if you were smoking in the park or doing something you don't want to tell your parents, please do. It's so important. If you think you can help with any leads at all, please tell your parents, please call us. It's in confidence. And here's the number, 01811 8055. The incident room is at Preston on 54811. That's 0772 54811. Tragic killing of 9-year-old Imraan Vohra in Preston 7 weeks ago. It happened in Avenham Park, where at about 4:30 on Thursday afternoon, the 11th of July, a woman thinks she saw a small boy walking alone. He was wearing a brown and beige anorak. Now, Imraan was last seen wearing one very similar. Little Imraan's body was found 2 days later in one of the dens that he used to play in. Superintendent John Boyd, we were rather disappointed with the number of calls in London, but I gather you've had quite a response in Preston.
Yes, the response in Preston has been very good. We've got more than 14 calls. One in particular, the content is something we would expect, and it will be followed up in the morning. It relates to somebody who, on the day in question, his movements were suspicious, to say the least.
Now, we had quite a good description of a man given by a schoolgirl, a friend of Imraan's, who thinks she saw this man call him across the road from the school, from Frenchwood Junior School.
Yes, the witness described the man as being about 5'10" to 6 foot, in his late 20s, slim-build with black hair. He was seen by the schoolgirl who knew Imraan.
Right. If you were in Avenham Park, if you know anyone who is in Avenham Park, remember the date, Thursday the 11th of July, between 4 and 7 p.m, please call us.
Now, there are some crimes, like the sadistic murder of 9-year-old Imraan Vohra, that are so heinous they are never forgotten. The Lancashire schoolboy was abducted, raped and then killed back in 1985. His parents had to endure a 24-year wait before finally being told this year that the man who had murdered their son was 62-year-old drifter Robert Morley. Detectives now know that Morley was a violent paedophile, but they believe he may have committed many more offences before his death 12 years ago. Can you shed light on any of them tonight?
This is the face of a sexual predator and child killer. 24 years ago, he committed a crime so brutal it sent shockwaves through the nation.
This is just such a terribly sad case. For it to be unresolved for 25 years, it's just such a long, long time.
The case was the horrific murder of a 9-year-old boy. His name was Imraan Vohra.
OK, children, there's the bell. We need to pack away quickly today, so can you just slip everything into your drawer?
One day, back in 1985, Imraan finished school and stayed in the playground playing marbles. He'd normally walk home with friends, but for some reason, this day was different.
Are you not coming home today? Nah, I'm ready for here for some. I'll see you tomorrow.
When his classmate left, Imraan was standing at the gate. 45 minutes later, he was seen with a man in his 40s. They were heading for Avenham Park, where Imraan had a series of dens and loved to play. It was the last time he was seen alive. The alarm was raised almost immediately when Imraan failed to turn up for lessons at a local mosque later that day. By the next morning, a massive police search was underway. Local people turned out in their droves to join the hunt, and mounted police combed the entire district.
Come over here.
Within hours, Imraan's body was found. He was lying naked from the waist down. Tied to a nearby tree were his trousers, left by the killer as a chilling calling card. The grim details of Imraan's sadistic death shattered the community here in Preston. The little boy had been raped and murdered, strangled with shoelaces.
In 1985, this was probably the biggest murder hunt that the Lancashire Constabulary had ever run. In the region of 100 investigators were attached to this inquiry. A huge number of people were interviewed, both within the Preston area and across the UK, sadly all without success.
But a significant clue lay buried in a statement taken days after Imraan's murder. A witness recalled how the schoolboy had recently met a mystery man who spoke German. But initial inquiries failed to trace him. With little to go on, detectives pinned their hopes on crime scene evidence after a post-mortem on Imraan's body discovered semen that could only be from the killer. But back then, DNA technology was in its infancy and couldn't be used to identify offenders.
In 1985, we didn't have the technology available to get DNA results from samples that we recovered from the scene, and also we didn't have a national DNA database, so we couldn't compare any results that we had against samples from known offenders.
As the case went cold, detectives had no choice but to wait for science to catch up. It would take nearly a quarter of a century and huge advances in DNA technology before the case could be solved.
Our piece of luck came in this case when a relative of Imraan's killer was convicted of a serious offence and went on the national DNA database. That man was the key to unlocking this case and allowed us to ultimately find Imraan's killer.
The trail led police to Robert Morley, a man who'd been dead for 12 years. But knowing the killer's name was just the beginning.
We simply had an identification of a man who, on the face of it, lived in and around London for most of his life. It only painted half the picture. The detective work came into play then to paint the rest of Morley's life, particularly in and around Lancashire.
Police had to prove he was capable of killing and began piecing together every aspect of the sadist's disturbing life.
We established that Morley was born in 1935 and spent much of his early days in and around the London area, with the exception of a short period of time, interestingly, when he was evacuated to Lancashire during the war. And that's when we think he made his first connections with Lancashire and may account for why he came back here.
Welcome there for you.
At 14 years old, the first signs of Morley's sexual deviance were recorded when he was arrested for indecent exposure. By the age of 16, Morley's behaviour had deteriorated further, and after a spate of shoplifting, he was sent by the courts to an approved school, a place well known for strict discipline and corporal punishment.
Handouts.
Morley joined the army in 1955 and was posted to Germany, working as a postal clerk. We know that he met his first wife out there, who was German, and spent a good deal of time living in that country.
Detectives now know that Morley's wife taught him to speak German. It seems too much of a coincidence to think Morley was not the German speaker who befriended Imraan in the days before his murder. Morley left the army in 1962 under a dark cloud. In 6 years of service, he appeared before magistrates 3 times for stealing and receiving stolen goods.
Morley's criminal history demonstrated that he was a prolific thief, stealing checkbooks, breaking into gas meters and the like.
His personal life was also deteriorating. By the age of 30, Morley had 6 children, but his marriage was over. He moved to Lancashire and started drinking heavily. As Morley's life spiralled into alcoholism, he drifted from job to job and woman to woman. He also started going missing for long periods of time. To where and to do what, detectives don't know. What they do know is that his womanising had turned into violence and abuse.
We've spoke with a number of women who have been in contact with Robert Morley throughout the years, and they describe a man who is controlling, sexually aggressive.
I'm not in the mood.
What do you mean you're not in the mood?
Bob, I said no. Bob, I said stop it. No. What do you mean no? Say come on. Bob, I don't want to. Stop it.
Morley's grim catalogue of violence continued unchecked throughout the 70s.
Increasingly, as well as being aggressive towards women, you know, disturbingly, I think Imraan may not have been the only child who suffered at his hands.
By 1981, Morley had moved here to Preston. 4 years later, he led Imraan Vohra to his death. When Morley ran away from the schoolboy's body that day, he had no way of knowing that 24 years later, his past would catch up with him.
Each time a new DNA technique has been introduced, the case has been revisited, and this ended with us getting a DNA result from the crime scene in 2006.
Detectives now had the killer's DNA, but it wasn't until last year the breakthrough finally came.
Jaffa, we've got him.
When a man was charged with a serious offence and his DNA loaded onto the national database, the profile was so similar to the killer's, detectives knew they were related. But how? A process of elimination began, and the trail quickly led to just one man, Robert Morley. When detectives discovered he died of lung cancer in 1997, it was a massive blow. But ultimately, it was his death that betrayed the darkest secret of his life. DNA from a lung biopsy taken at the time of Morley's treatment was compared to the DNA from the 1985 murder scene. It proved categorically that Robert Morley was Imraan's killer.
This is an investigation that's spanned almost a quarter of a century, and it was never going to have a happy ending, but we have reached an ending nonetheless. And I really do hope that that conclusion has been able to bring some solace for Imraan's mum and dad.
Finally, after all these years, we know the truth about Imraan Vohra's brutal murder. But we still don't know the whole truth about Morley's life. Until detectives have the complete picture, we'll never know who else might have suffered in the way little Imraan did.
That's the big question, Matthew, isn't it? How many other children might he have attacked?
Yeah, the police and the profilers are absolutely convinced there are more victims, perhaps many more. I mean, this happened in 1985. Morley died in 1997, so there's a gap of 12 years that detectives are desperate to fill in. I mean, they know some of his movements. He moved away from Lancashire pretty soon after this murder and then lived in Sussex, in Essex, in London, in Hertfordshire. I think it's also worth having a look at some of those photographs again, because some have never been published before.
Right.
And police obviously want to hear from people who are looking at those photos and thinking, that's the person that attacked me.
You mentioned their criminal profilers. Was Morley a classic sexual predator in a profile sort of a way?
Absolutely. I mean, he targeted vulnerable people, vulnerable women, and then later on, obviously, a child. There was the stealing also that the profilers pinpointed. Strangely, that often crops up in the history of sexual offenders, that notion of just taking something you want, instant gratification, and that's a trait that becomes so warped later in life, so classic signs.
It's not, it's not always the case that it's the signs that catches them, but it was on this occasion pretty much.
It was. It is the only encouraging aspect of a tragic case like this, the notion that scientific advances allows those cold cases, there are thousands of them, the chance to go back and find that fragment of new evidence to solve cases, and that's what happened here.
OK.